Valerie.
I know, he's out of the country, I think I heard.
Yeah, she's out of the country. So she.
I do as well.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Just wanted to welcome you to Clark Atlanta University. My name is Marshall Taggart. I serve as the Associate Vice President responsible for the Office of Government Affairs. And this is our third Senate Study Committee meeting, which is chaired by Senator Sonia Halpern. So in turn, I will hand it over to Madam Chairperson, I'm sorry, in this case. So also too, it's a holiday, right? It's Fried Chicken Wednesday, so I'm pretty sure you you went back in the back and had a partake in the good food. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I knew they would go to you. On behalf of our President George T. French Jr., he welcomes you to Clark Atlanta University. Give yourselves a round of applause.
Good afternoon. I am Senator Sonia Halpern. Glad to welcome each of you to this, our third committee meeting of our HBCU Study Committee. We will open, before we do anything else, with a prayer, and Senator Tanya Anderson will lead us.
Gracious God, we are so thankful. We're thankful for your love. We're thankful for your protection. We are thankful for your power that operates in our lives. We ask God now that you will be with us in the midst of our meeting, that you will give us clarity of heart, mind, and spirit, that we will be mindful of the assignment at hand, and that we will be good stewards of what you've given us as gifts to make productive this meeting. We give you thanks and we give you praise. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. So it is October 26th. This is our third official committee meeting for our study committee on excellence, innovation, technology at Georgia's historically Black colleges and universities. We have a great committee who have been working hard since the committee was formed in June. And I'm going to have each one of us introduce ourselves in just a moment, but first want to just remind everybody, if you don't know the genesis of this study committee. This study committee was created in June by the Lieutenant Governor, who appointed each of us to the committee and charged us with doing the work of determining the ways that the state might be able to better support and promote the work of our HBCUs. And so we've taken that to heart all of this time. This study committee, this study committee will conclude by December 31st of this year. And look at this. Perfect timing, because we were just going to introduce ourselves. And so
We knew we were going to be fashionably late.
I did. So I'm gonna let while they're settling in, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Senator Sonia Halpern, thrilled to chair this committee. I represent District 39, which is right here in Fulton County, and I've got neighborhoods across the 5 cities of Atlanta, College Park, City of South Fulton, Union City, and East Point. And which side of the table would you like to start at?
Let's go to the left.
Let's go to the left. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm delighted to be here this morning. I apologize for my tardy arrival and my casual attire. They're on a construction site this morning, and I'm not exactly at home there. But I serve in the state Senate, currently serve as President Pro Tem. I'm winding down my term. My term expires on January 10th. And it's been the honor of a lifetime to serve with you and our other colleagues in the Georgia State Senate. And been excited to be on this study committee. It's been productive and anticipate more good things to come from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Senator Valencia C., and I am so honored to be a part of this study committee. I actually grew up in this neighborhood almost. If anybody heard of Northside Drive, I kind of grew up in Herndon Homes back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm a real great baby. My oldest sister actually is an alumni of Clark Atlanta. But I am glad to be with you all today.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm Jason Anabatardi. I represent Senate District 31 in West Georgia. So Paulding County, Polk County, and Haralson County. I've been in the Senate. This will be the end of my first term, and just honored to be here with everyone to talk about the issues we're going to talk about. And thank you, Chairwoman, for the invitation to this great university, and look forward to sharing and listening to everyone today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Tanya Anderson. I am State Senator for Georgia's 43rd District, Senate District, which covers portions of DeKalb, Rockdale, and Newton. I am a proud HBCU grad, and I have lived that HBCU life. So I am an HBCU cheerleader for HBCUs everywhere, but especially in Georgia, and I'm honored to serve on this committee. Oh, yes. And I'm chair of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus.
And I just wanted to add, this is my 20th year serving in the Georgia State Senate.
All right. And then we might have Senator Sims, no. So, but I will just say one other committee member, Senator Freddie Powell Sims, may be joining us on Zoom later, but I don't think she's here now. And I want to give a thank you to Clark Atlanta University and Marshall Taggart for hosting us. I will tell you that we had our first meeting at the Capitol. We held our second meeting, and I thought it was very important that we get out of the Capitol and out from under the Gold Dome and onto campuses. And so Fort Valley State University hosted us just earlier this month, and we are now sitting here on Clark Atlanta University's campus. And I want to thank Andrew Long too for the lunch that he's provided for us ahead of this meeting. And I do want to also acknowledge, because I've got some other colleagues who are here in the room, and I want to specifically say hello and let you see Senator Nan Orrock. I see Representative Misha Maynor. And both of them actually represent the AU Center. So both of them, their districts actually include the Atlanta University Center. And then we've got a number of our college presidents also in the room with us. Of course, President George French, who we will hear from in a moment, president of Clark Atlanta University. President Matthew Williams, Interdenominational Theological Center is with us today. President Marion Frederick from Albany State University. And of course, President Helene Gale from Spelman College, who also will be speaking later today. And so let me see, just a couple other thank yous to our very capable Senate press.
Yes.
For making this meeting available to anybody who is streaming in. And of course, they've also, I want to tell you all and share this, we have actually created a website. It's a portal specifically for this study committee. And so it's HBCUstudycommittee.com. Our prior meetings, the recordings of those are housed on that website. I don't know that all the presentations are yet, but they will be along with the committee members. And we've also opened up a public portal that you can access from that site, inviting people in the public who want to provide public testimony to us for our consideration as we move through the rest of this process of the study committee and into the final report writing and recommendation stage. So each of you, please share with your networks and invite people to let us know what they're thinking as well. And finally, I offer a heartfelt thank you to every single person who was in this room today for recognizing the importance of the work that we're doing and taking time out of your Wednesday to come here and be with us this afternoon. It means a lot to each of us and helps to underscore the importance of what we're doing. And with that, we will now move forth into the agenda as it is written, and I invite President George French to come to the stage with your presentation and remarks.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator, to this august body of legislators of this great state of Georgia. We are most grateful to have you on the beautiful campus of Clark Atlanta University. To these colleagues, the colleagues from colleges and universities here within the Atlanta University Center, including my colleague, Dr. Williams and Dr. Gale. It's so good to have my team members here from Clark Atlanta University, several of my vice presidents, associate vice presidents, even some students are here. And for that, I am grateful. For this opportunity to stand on hollow ground, we take quite seriously, Senator. We take seriously the efforts of this august Senate Study Committee. This Committee on Excellence, Innovation, Technology at Historically Black Colleges and Universities. I take pause because I was with Senator Halpern on Monday when we made history at the New York Stock Exchange, an exchange built upon the backs of African Americans, but we were not allowed to trade there. We were traded instead. But on Monday, to celebrate Tommy Dortch and the 100 Black Men's 37th anniversary, by closing the stock market, the exchange on that day, it was historically significant. And the significance reverberated throughout the room as everyone understood what was going on. What's going on and where you stand now is significant. It's significant because the Atlanta University Center is one of the highest points within the entire city of Atlanta. One of the highest points, I mean like entire city. Yep. And one of the major and several of the major, I should say, battles of the Civil War took place on these hallowed grounds. It was April 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse when the Confederacy surrendered to the Union. You all remember after General William Tecumseh Sherman had his march to the sea and had the scorched earth policy, and he destroyed and burnt the city down and surrendered in April 1865. But let me tell you about this sacred ground. We were established 5 months later in September of 1865 by the American Missionary Society and the Freedmen's Bureau. And we started something that is magnificently great. These are the hallowed grounds upon which W.E.B. Du Bois, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, he did his greatest work right here at Atlanta University. For 23 years, the book that I picked up this morning on the way out the door to read, W.E.B. Du Bois' Data Portraits, Visualizing Black America. We're talking about what Dr. Williams made reference to. We're talking about infographics and visualization techniques that were unheard of when Du Bois was doing these things at Atlanta University. He later, Dr. Washington, you know, he became the expert for the United States Department of Labor statistics. He ran statistics. He understood the demographics. All of that took place on these hallowed grounds. So we celebrate the fact that the Georgia legislature, specifically this Senate committee, has taken the time to have this conversation about supporting historically Black colleges and universities, specifically those precious within the state of Georgia. And what's singularly important about that to me, as my mind races back one more time into history, I remember it was Asa Ware, who was the superintendent of schools here in Atlanta and later was named the first president of Atlanta University. And Ware had the nerve, gall, and audacity to not only invite Blacks to this historically Black college and university, but he invited whites to study here. The word got down to the legislature, and the legislature said, oh, no. Whites and Blacks cannot be educated together. I do not care that you know that Atlanta University is all of that and you want to be there, but you can't. We will not allow it, and we will withdraw the only allocation that's ever been made at that time to Atlanta University. They withdrew the $8,000 because the legislature asked the question. They said, President Ware, if you promise not to allow whites to be on your campus again, if you promise not to allow whites to intermingle with Black faculty and Black students, we will restore your allocation. He said, no, I think we will survive. I can tell you, we have survived. Thank you to this Senate committee for your visitation today. We would highlight two of the major things that are occurring on the campus of Clark Atlanta University. We've enjoyed traveling to other universities and receiving the reports from the presidents of the magnificent work in Albany State University. That I knew. See, that's how it works. In the back of your mind, isn't that right, Dr. Pleasant? You just keep it back there. I said, no, that's a third. I said, Dr. Williams. I said, I knew. My apologies, Madam President. Welcome to Clark Atlanta University. So these magnificent universities. So one of the things that we've done recently is we kicked off a $250 million capital campaign. And we're very excited that that's going to meet scholarship needs and building infrastructure needs, technology needs, the gamut. $250 million is a lot of money, but we are excited that we are going to raise it. We're excited that we're about $50 million toward the goal currently. So that is ahead of schedule. So David Brand, I'm going to be calling upon you to go out and find some more contributors to Clark Atlanta University. COVID update. We're excited about the progress that we were able to make as the Atlanta University Center Schools. We came together, and Morehouse School of Medicine, we were pleased to have their expertise and their careful tutelage actually through the process. We wound up with one of the lowest positivity rates in the nation right here at the AUC. Overall, below 1% positivity. It was important because we kept our faculty. We didn't have any layoffs of faculty or staff. As a matter of fact, we did cost of living increases. We did bonuses at Christmas. So instead of being, oh, woe is me, we said, no, it's time to celebrate our people because our people are working hard. They're putting in the hours. They're working from home. They're working remotely. So we've done everything that we could to lift them up. The significance of the leadership of the AUC, though, goes beyond our positivity rates. It goes back to what Du Bois always talked about, miseducation. If you all remember at the beginning of the COVID, that was a huge crisis when you had African Americans running around talking about African Americans could not contract COVID. You all don't remember that, but that happened. And that was an issue. That was an issue. Because we still had this problem of the Tuskegee studies. So there were still questions about science and who we follow. This was a tipping point. This was an inflection point for our community because the African-American leadership within higher education said to our community in barbershops and nail salons, calm down. We're intellectuals. We are going to listen to the science. We're going to listen to the science. And that was an inflection point for our community. That's very important. And our leadership of HBCUs was significant toward that effort. Also, we were able to garner through the United Negro College Fund and other advocacy organizations, hundreds of millions of dollars for all of our institutions. CARES Act provided at Clark Atlanta University, we purchased 4,000 laptops. I purchased laptops before, I thought it was pretty cool. I had 2 kids go in and say, hey, let me have 2 laptops. It was really cool when I went in and said I have 4,000. And we gave them to all of our students. Hotspots, we paid money for travel home, for food, for rent in some instances. We were able to really meet the needs of our population due to those funds. This is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what happened on October the 16th, very briefly. And I don't want to talk about it to lift it up. I want to talk about it because it's really, it can be deflating, Mr. Cooper. For us to work day and night for weeks and months on end to put together a homecoming celebration and experience. And as a matter of fact, it was so good for Clark Atlanta University, we won the game. Okay. So we won the game. We doubled the size of the band since what it was last year. We were given $1.2 million in gifts at the game at halftime. I mean, everything's well. I'm almost home. Here it is. I'm just ecstatic. And when I saw the phone ring, you all know how it is. I didn't even want to answer it. Answer the phone, and some local has driven down one of the local streets, public streets, and opened fire, just began shooting. Okay, I want to make it very clear that that's exactly what happened. Because sometimes we're so rough on our young students that we say, well, you all must have been partying, you all must have been fighting, you all must have been doing. No, they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. Homecoming celebration, minding their own business. And that's what, and I'm gonna say this parenthetically, and I know it's not gonna sit well with some people, but they'll be okay. That's what happens sometimes in our local communities if we don't communicate to our people that is a sacred space over there. You may not have done what you were supposed to do when you were in school, and since you didn't, don't come over here in the middle of what we're doing when our students are doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's right. That's right. That's why we talked to Mayor Dickens and police chief, and they on the very next day they were on the phone with us. They were receptive. They listened. They increased patrol in the neighborhoods, but we have to keep it going because what we know is that crime is down everywhere in Atlanta except in Zone 2, which is up 24%. So when I sit and I speak to the legislators and ask them to help me, I'm not going to just come to you and say, well, help, woe is me. I'm going to come with statistics. I'm going to ask the question now, if it's up 24% in this zone, what do our patrols look like? Are they up 24% or more? If they aren't, we have a problem. And we have a problem because we're all in this together, guys, whether it's Morehouse or Clark Atlanta or Morris Brown or Spelman or Kennesaw State or Albany State, we're all in this together. And when they say something bad happened at the HBCU this past weekend, they look at all of us the same way on that thing. You can fool yourself if you want to, but they're gonna look at all of us the same way. And that's all of our problem and all of our issues. Now let me go back. So we actually increased significantly at Clark Atlanta University on Friday. Senators, we're talking about budget exceptions. We're not talking about increase in budget. We did a budget exception on Friday for $1 million to increase our force here at Clark Atlanta University to make sure we have all the officers that we need and that they have all of the equipment that they need to keep us safe. So then let me go over a couple of initiatives that we have going on. We have a lot of capital projects. We are the largest landowner in the west end of Atlanta. Clark Atlanta University is. So we've been given a lot of land. We purchased a lot of land. In some cases, we've not been the best landlords in keeping those properties up. Like the Pasco's property that's around the corner that we've had for 25 years. And I hope I don't offend anybody, but you got to tell it like it is. It is what it is. The point is we're here now to fix it. That's the point. We're here now to say to the community, yes, we realize that Pascals has been there and we are in financial position now to do something about it. I defend Clark Atlanta University because it's not in those instances of Pascals that we just didn't want to do it. It's one thing when you want to do something, but you just don't have the money. The sin is when you have the money and you don't take care of your property, okay? So I'm saying to the community, yes, we have brought in significant resources to the institution over the last 3 years to the tune of several hundred millions of dollars that has to go back into, and will go back into the community. Pascals is one of our Eli, what's at the top? That's my chief operating.
Residence halls.
This is my chief operating officer, Eli Phillips. So we have several, about 9 priorities. Very top, of course, being residence halls. Clark Atlanta University, yes, we've had housing issues in the past. Yes, we'll have housing issues in the future. No doubt about it, just as Morehouse will, just as Howard will, just as any institution in a space like this where the community rents are going up. There's no more real estate being made. We have about 2,100 students on campus. We have a need for about 3,000 beds that we just don't have right now. So we have to build, which is what we're planning on doing, and expanding our residence hall capacity. Hey, at the end of the day, you all know it's a good problem to have. It's better than having them and no one's in them than to have them full and everyone wants to get in. So we are going to increase our housing stock. Secondly, we are going to stabilize Gaines Hall. Gaines Hall, of course, National Register of Historic Places, one of the places where Du Bois had his office. It was a property that was in dispute for some years in litigation, and we know that it was in the hands of the city for some time, but after the litigation is now back into our hands in horrible disrepair. It's going to take several tens of millions of dollars to bring this property back. Park Street Church is another of ours, and then we have CCRTD partnerships. That's the last one I would talk about, is that is the Cancer Research and Therapeutic Development Center, the largest academic prostate research center in the nation, academic research center in the nation. And this is the place that we are making strides. This is the place where we plan to continue growing. We have 4 patents in now in various stages. Cancer, prostate cancer in particular is ravaging the African-American community. And we're looking forward to the day when we can make a contribution towards eradicating prostate cancer. So those are some of the things that are going on within the institution. One of the big announcements that you heard a few days ago was that after nearly over 2 years, Apple and Propel have decided to announce the location of the $100 million HBCU Innovation Hub, and that is on the campus of Clark and will be on the campus of Clark Atlanta University. We are proud. We just announced a $5 million gift from Google. The list goes, I'm not even gonna get started on those lists. I will say that Dr. Talithia Washington is a jewel to the Atlanta University Center. This is the individual that you saw recently all in papers, social media, internationally talking about the, Dr. Washington, I'm gonna ask you to tell us about, yes, thank you.
Should I take the mic or?
Hey, come on. This is how these Atlanta University, these Clark Atlanta University professors, they would take over in a minute.
And Spelman grad.
Thank you.
That part.
And marching Maroon Tiger. Yes, I play in the Morehouse Marching Band, so I'm all over. Yes, so my name is Dr. Talithia Washington. I'm a mathematician, faculty professor here at Clark Atlanta University. I am the inaugural director of the Atlanta University Center Data Science Initiative. And we work across Clark-Atlanta University, Morehouse College, Morehouse School of Medicine, and Spelman College in all things data science to assist in developing new innovations in data science research and education. Right now, African Americans make up about 3% of those who are in the data science analytics professions, and we seek to change that. Because when you look at technology, it's all data enabled, to the point from looking at facial recognition. Police departments are using that with predictive analysis, to going to the airport and washing your hands in a wash basin and it doesn't recognize the hue of your skin. So we're looking to diversify those in the tech workforce, the data science workforce, and all jobs that require some sort of data science competencies to diversify and strengthen those skills. We recently were awarded $10 million from the National Science Foundation to establish the national.
That pretty quickly, slow.
I just get excited when I talk about data science. You know,
10 million.
just, yeah, we put 10 on it. $10 million from the National Science Foundation. Yes, thank you. First HBCU-led alliance from NSF, and these alliances, there includes alliances that look to facilitate change at scale at a national level to diversify the STEM workforce. And again, we're the first HBCU-led one, cohort 4. So we were awarded $10 million to stand up the National Data Science Alliance, essentially as an effort of a mega outreach of what we're doing here with the Data Science Initiative to all HBCUs, to serve as catalysts to promote and develop and strengthen and support HBCU institutions in developing data science programs. We are not student-facing, we're faculty, staff, and administrative-facing, developing an ecosystem where the students can come and thrive and grow in data science. And we have partners at Howard University as one of our regional hubs, as is Fisk University and Clark-Atlanta University. So we're really excited about launching this effort and look forward to working with Albany State as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We could share so much more with you about what's going on at Clark-Atlanta University. Time is of the essence. Andrew, thank you for all that you do to help the senator with HBCUs in our community. But thank you so much. Are there any questions, Senator?
Any questions? No,
Allocations.
thank you so very much.
Allocations?
It's on the way, Mr. President.
Thank you. We will hear next from Ms. Tracy Cook, who is the Chief Fiscal Officer at the University System of Georgia. Ms. Cook, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I'm talking about you.
You didn't know what he was going to do.
No, you good. Never heard of that.
I'm not recognizing Father.
Stand to the side if that's okay. Thank you for having me today. I am representing the University System of Georgia. It's the public higher education system here in the state. We have 26 institutions, of which 3 of our very proud historically Black colleges and universities, Savannah State University, Fort Valley State University, and Albany State University. I see our president here. What I hope to do today, what I thought would be helpful, is to talk a little bit about how we are funded as a system, and then specifically focus a little bit on the funding for our HBCUs. So because we are a public agency of the state of Georgia, I thought it would be helpful to start with the budget outlook for the state of Georgia. So this pie chart represents how the funding for Georgia is distributed across many of the agencies. So it's about a $30 billion budget for the state. And as you can see, education is a high priority. 53% of the budget goes to education, and specifically 10% or 3.1 billion of those funds come to the university system. I think you heard from our presidents over the last 2 meetings at Fort Valley State, Savannah State, and Albany State. They've talked to you a little bit about their institutions that are under our system. Moving to the next slide. So now I'm just going to bring it down to the University System of Georgia. We are about a $10 billion enterprise for the state. So this is a consolidated budget for all of our 26 institutions. And as you can see, that first line, I think there should be is the state funding that we just discussed. So it's a $3.1 billion. It's a significant portion of our budget. It's 30% of our total budget. The other two major revenue streams are obviously our tuition that comes from our students. And then the sponsored category is also a pretty large, significant revenue stream. We have lots of research at our 4 research institutions, so that's about half of that budget. That budget also includes the federal funding that we get from the Pell program, and then some other private and state restricted funds along the way. So again, we're about a $10.3 billion enterprise. We serve about 340,000 students across the state, and we employ about 51,000 full-time staff and faculty. So talking a little about the $3.1 billion, how do we get that money from the legislative body? We have had a funding formula that was designed. It was a collective effort between House, Senate, the governor's office. There were businesses involved, as well as representatives from the university system. So back in 1984, those minds got together and created a funding formula. And I love the funding formula. Sometimes I'm on calls with other states that don't have really a predictable model of how they are funded. So this is a really big win for the state of Georgia. It's been in place since 1984. I think that's about 38 years. So it's pretty old. But it is a predictable way of estimating the cost of education to teach students. So the biggest driver in the funding formula are our students, right? It's enrollment, or more specifically, credit hour production. So it really looks at how many credits are our students taking in a given year, and what are the number of faculty and what are the number of supports that are necessary to provide that level of funding. So we run that formula every year. And we are permitted to make an ask to the state of Georgia to fund any incremental growth. And so I do want to point out, it is an ask formula, which means we ask the state for a lump sum amount, but our Board of Regents has the ability to allocate those funds across our 26 institutions. Obviously, the way you earn it, when you grow, you earn money. If as you shrink, you lose money through the formula, but the board has the ability to allocate those funds to make certain that all of our institutions remain healthy. One other thing I just want to mention is credit hour production. We talked about the credit hours. So it's the English classes, it's the chemistry, it's 3 hours here, 3 hours there. All credit hours are not created equal, meaning that the value in the formula is different, right? So if you have a more high cost, high tech course, some of your STEM courses are valued at a higher rate than your liberal arts courses. Your first and second year courses are valued at a lower rate than your third and fourth year courses, as well as graduates. So you could literally have, people always say, there's disparity, but you could literally have 2 institutions that educate the exact same number of students, but the funding received from the state could be very different depending on the disciplines that they teach and the type of courses that they teach. And the last point I'll make on this slide is when the formula was created back in the 80s, the intent was that the state would cover 75% of whatever that cost is, and that tuition would make up the other 25%. Currently, we're at about a 56-44 split, and I'll talk to you about how we got there. So if I were to take this chart all the way back to the 80s, you would see it would show that the state share was at 75% for all of those years. Some of you may remember in the early 2000s, we had a slight economic downturn, and that was the first time we saw the state just was not in a position to be able to fund the funding formula fully. That's when the level dropped to about 67%, and then the other 33% was made up by students. What really showed up is when the Great Recession in 2009, I don't know if y'all remember, but the revenues for the state plummeted. You remember? They plummeted. I mean, it was a hard way to go. And ironically, when it was a lot of job loss, a lot of loss of revenue for the state, that's when a lot of folks go back to school. So I have another chart, I don't have it here today, but we saw a surge in the number of students that we had to educate at the same time that the state was just not able to fund not only the growth, but we also, along with all state agencies, took pretty significant budget reductions mid-year and permanent reductions along the way. And so that's how we got from kind of a 75-25 split down to about a 50-50 during that time. Some of it was made up by strategic increases in tuition. At that time, we also instituted, some of you may have heard of this too, the special institutional fee. Our students loved it. But we had to find ways, again, we were educating many, many, many more students. We had to find ways to bring in that revenue, to pay for those faculty, to pay for those support services. Good news though, if you look at this chart, post-pandemic in 2023, we are in a really good position from an economic standpoint. The state provided $230 million to backfill some of those austerity cuts that were taken along the way. It afforded our institutions to eliminate the special institutional fee for our students. That fee was about $170 to $544, depending on what institution you went to per semester. So while it wasn't new money for our institutions to invest, it was kind of backfilling revenue, but that was a big win for our students to not have to pay those fees in the future. And that growth in 23 is also a byproduct of the $220 million that was provided by the state for the $5,000 pay raise that was afforded to all of our full-time employees, which again was another big win in that I'm sure many of you that have businesses are fully aware of the competition and for talent across the state. And so that was very helpful in helping us to be competitive with our full-time folks. So this is just a depiction. I won't spend much time on this, but the dark blue line is our head count and the top line is our credit hour production. So again, we're about, and these aren't the latest numbers, where our full numbers will be out soon, but we serve about 340,000 students across the state. They take about 8.5 million credit hours. And those credit hours are what we put into the formula and what the legislative body considers each and every year. So how are our HBCUs doing? We have, again, 3 public historically black colleges: Albany State, Savannah State, and Fort Valley State. As you can see, and this is not atypical to what we're seeing with many of our other institutions, but, you know, and I'll focus on maybe 2018 forward. There has been a relative decline, you can see in our institutions. Albany this year has maintained the line. They actually are predicting a slight increase, which is really good news. But institutions have been challenged from an enrollment perspective. One point I'll make about this chart, if you may remember, back in 2017, Albany State University and Darton College were combined. So I do want to be transparent that those are the combined numbers. So when those 2 schools stood alone, that would have been the sum total of the enrollment for those 2 institutions. And we went through some challenges. When the 2 institutions were combined, we saw a pretty substantial drop in enrollment. Again, Albany has leveled off, but we do continue to see declines in a significant number of our institutions across the state, not just our HBCUs. So here's why. This chart kind of shows the projected population growth through between 2020 and 2030. The lighter, the beige is decline. The light blue is modest to modest growth, I'll say. And really the growth is in the dark blue. So you can see the growth between the folks that are age 16 to 24 is in the northern part of our state. We have institutions that span the entire state. About 18 of them are in that light blue beige area. And so we're seeing that typical high school or student that we would select to enroll in our institutions, you're seeing that population decline. And all 3 of our HBCUs reside in the lower part of the state. So that's one reason why we know we're experiencing enrollment decline. The next is the Georgia High School Graduate Pipeline. This is something that we've been talking about with our institutions for some time. No, this is not even a prediction. This is not an estimate. This is kind of a real thing. Birth rates declined about 18 years ago, and it's starting to show up. And so what we know is that by 2026, the high school pipeline in Georgia will decrease. It will decline, and so we'll have less students to be able to tap into from that traditional student market. What this also means is this chart is Georgia's, but this same chart for other states, the decline has started sooner. And so they are already coming to Georgia. They're doing massive, aggressive campaigns to get our Georgia students to come to their institutions. And so that's another reason that we're having some challenges with enrollment at our institutions. So I guess, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of the strategies, some of the things that we're doing as a system to try to combat this. But I just wanted to shed some light on why we're seeing some of our declines in enrollment. So shifting a little bit we're going all the way back to the $3.1 billion, right? That funding has to serve 26 institutions, but I wanted to focus on the HBCUs here. So as a reminder, 26 institutions, we have 4 sectors, we call them sectors. So we have our 4 research institutions, Georgia Tech, UGA, and Georgia State, and Augusta University. We have another subsector that serves our regions, that's our comprehensive institutions. And then we have our state university sector. There's 9 institutions in that sector, of which 3 of our HBCUs reside. And then our final sector is what we call our access mission institutions, and we have 9 in that space as well. So I wanted to just show from a funding per FTE standpoint, the average funding in that sector is about $6,600 per student, right? When you look at Fort Valley, it's about $7,800, Savannah $7,600, and Albany $6,100. So you can see where they fare within their sector. I think the HBCUs do pretty well within the sector. Albany is on the lower end, and if you remember, we talked earlier about the consolidation. Darton was one of those access institutions, so heavy associate degree programs, heavy on the first and second year credit hour. And we talked about that too, lower value in the funding formula. So it perfectly makes sense where they reside because really they have a dual mission within the sector. From a capital standpoint, if we can shift a little bit just to talk about capital. So the state also provides capital or bond funding for projects. We looked over the last 10 years, if you sum all of that up, it's close to about $140 million. So the state has made roughly $140 million investment into our 3 HBCUs by way of new facilities. I have a couple of them to name: new facilities, renovations, major repairs for certain facilities. So again, if you were to compare per FTE or within the sector, this is a pretty significant investment for the state universities within the sector. Shifting a little bit to academics. So I'm going to move away from the numbers a little bit. We have a process by which institutions, it is really at the institution level that degree programs come forward to our board. We rely on our institutions and the leadership there to really assess the needs of the students, the needs of the community, workforce needs to determine what are those programs that make sense at an institution. So all of our institutions are permitted to submit proposals to the Board of Regents for new degree programs. Some of the recent programs, Albany, Fort Valley, and Savannah State have all submitted. Some of them, I just found them to be quite interesting. Savannah State was just approved in 2022 for a new BS in data analytics. I always said if I wasn't so old, I'd go back to school and get a degree in data analytics. It's a hot field right now. And so I think it's a smart degree to begin to offer there. Fort Valley State University was recently approved for a degree in nursing. Huge win for the state. We all know we have a nursing shortage, so that's going once that program is stood up, that's going to be a big win for that school. And then Albany State University, I'm not going to put the president on the spot, but was also recently approved for a master's in athletic training. I just found that one to be interesting. But again, it's looking at what is the market needs and how do we serve those needs. So we're pretty certain that the institutions, as they continue to put forward these programs, we do a really good vetting process. You have to submit a business case. There has to be demand. There has to be employability for our students, right? We want to make certain that we're linking the skill sets that were required in those jobs to how we're educating our students. So all of those things are done as we stand up new programs across our schools. And I did want to highlight too, for the nursing and the teaching programs, all of our HBCUs live in that space. You can see Albany has an AS, a BS, an RN to BSN. In nursing, they also have a BS and MS in education. Fort Valley, again, we just talked about the new nursing program. They also have a BS and MS in education. And Savannah State has several BS in education for several different disciplines. So system, I think being as a part of a system, again, we're the public higher education system that has 26 institutions, distinct missions, distinct populations that they serve, and fortunate to have 3 HBCUs as a part of the system. But there's some benefits to that. One, we talked about the funding, the ability for our board to allocate resources to our institutions. We also talked about, the enrollment, challenges. And so we have built significant numbers of data analytic tools for our institutions to be able to use, to look at high school market share, to look at adult learners, where are these learners, so that they can target their recruitment efforts for students. We also have enrollment summits across our institution where they can share best practices and ideas to really try to get a handle on enrollment challenges for the future. And again, I was really pleased to see the work at Albany and the stabilization of the enrollment there. Student success outcomes. Some of you may or may not have heard of the Momentum Year, but it's this targeted, it's in concert with the Complete College Georgia. How do we get students to start and finish, right? How do we get them to stay? And really looking at making certain that when they come in, they have a purposeful choice. They make a purposeful choice. We try to steer them into the things or look at the areas that they can do well, that they enjoy, that they've been successful in. Right out the gate. So I think some of those tools and applying them across the institutions have been helpful. We also have what we call eCore. It is a consortium whereby we offer the core education. So all of those courses, the English, the math, in an online format. It provides for flexibility for our students across the institutions. It is a consolidated consortium that all of our institutions can tap into. And then we also have the affordable learning, which is really an effort to really, how can we eliminate the cost of textbooks? We know that's a significant barrier for our students getting textbooks. So doing more by way of open resource, designing textbooks that get them at least low cost or no cost to our students. And so those efforts from a system perspective, we think are big wins for our students as well. And then lastly, I'm a fiscal person, so always leveraging the power of the system by contract. We have dining contracts, we have enterprise system contracts, software, health insurance. I mean, we could go on, but just to be able to leverage the power of the buying power of the system to keep costs low for all 26 institutions. So I thought I'd end with, this is us, right? This is who we are. We have institutions, different sizes, different missions across the state. Albany State, Fort Valley State, Savannah State, public higher education in the state, all shining stars among the 26 institutions. So we're proud of that and very proud of the support that the state provides, started going all the way back to the beginning by way of operating dollars, by way of capital dollars, and the board support via allocation. So sorry about that. With that, thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Your first slide gave us a pie chart. And on that is a category described as other.
I knew you would ask me that.
You saw me looking at you. I know you saw me looking.
I'm gonna have to report back to you. There's another section. What we did is we took all of the agencies in the bill, and they're tangential to education, but I'm gonna have to get back to you. And I started to do the research on that this morning, and I did, but I'll send you what that is. It is in the bill. It is education related, but it's not specifically to TCSG, to USG, or K through 12.
So second question is, what other universities that are not part of USG receive funding from the state of Georgia that you know of?
I believe Mercer
I know.
gets
I was waiting for you to say
funding. I
that.
believe Morehouse School of Medicine.
Okay.
And I'm going to apologize. When I get that bill, I focus in on USG. But I do think those two schools, and there may be a handful of others that do receive funding. Georgia Military College also receives funding from the state.
Okay, so it's possible for HBCUs. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's particularly interesting that we're seeing across the state institutions from other states coming in and sometimes getting our best and brightest. And how do we as a state and as a university system combat that? And what would be your your thoughts are on that topic. I really am disappointed when I see, top-ranked students leave the state of Georgia. They go to, I'm not picking them Auburn or whatever, wherever they go there, they potentially meet a spouse there, they do an internship there, they make friends there, and guess what else they do there? They pay taxes there.
We want to pay taxes here, right?
Pay taxes here, yeah, I want them to contribute to our communities. And would you have any thoughts or comments? I sure appreciate it.
Well, I do think, the Hope Scholarship, bar none, I think is one of the biggest levers, right, to keep students in the state of Georgia. So that's one, and we don't have control over that, but I know, the fact that the other is the offerings, right? The fact, I feel like I always say, we have something for everyone, right? We have 26 institutions. We have the Georgia Techs of the world. We have the UGAs of the world. We have the Albany States of the world. That notion, and just marketing, I think we have to do a better job marketing who we are and what we offer and the value of staying in the state as opposed to going to an Auburn or somewhere else. And then also we're trying to be competitive. Again, we know that a lot of them are coming in. I mean, you see their billboards, on our highways. But offering, tuition to at least the bordering states, right? That's where we think we have the most competition by way of, being able to pay in-state tuition and, come reside here. And we're hoping the reverse, right? We hope that if we can get you here, right, and you make the friends and you build a community, that you stay here and pay taxes in Georgia. So those are just some of the tools. We're constantly thinking about, ways to keep our students here in the state.
One more follow-up.
Yes.
If I may, one more follow-up, and I'll leave you alone.
No problem.
So data analytics, health sciences, public safety, allied healthcare, nursing, those fields were hit the hardest in this past couple of years. How do we bounce back from there as a system to attract young people into those fields?
Yeah, teaching, I don't know if you mentioned teaching, but.
I did teach you another one, yes.
I think
And
again,
they were so demoralized
yeah.
during this past couple of years. They were beat up. So we gotta reverse that, in my view.
I think one, is shoring up our programs. I mean, again, it's about promoting what we have. It's what's the ROI, right, for our students? We have to be able to show these students that, you come in, you make the commitment, you come in to do a teacher education program or a nursing program. You're gonna have a job. You're gonna have a good paying job when you leave. And we really rely on our presidents to understand their communities, to understand their market. And really, this is something I didn't talk about and I meant to, but this whole strategic alignment, right? I mean, we're past the days that we can offer every degree program to every student. Our resources it does not allow for that model anymore. So it's really getting back to honing on what is important in your region, what is important in your area, and making certain that you, at the institutional level, you have those programs, and that's where you plow your resources into. And it might mean that some of the other ones have to fall by the wayside, but again, that's going to look different at each institution.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today, and I've got one or two questions. One is not to make you uncomfortable, because nobody likes talking about university consolidation or mergers. But as we look at efficiencies, opportunities, the state of the economy, and I think some of the things that Senator Miller talked about, has there been conversations, or if we cast out looking at the next 5 to 10 years, do we think we will see more of that? I'm not just talking about regarding HBCUs, but in the broader university system, do we see more of that coming down the pipe?
So you asked about conversation. That conversation has not started. We did 8, 10, I can't remember. We did a lot of consolidations in the past. And, we learned a lot from that. But yeah, we are constantly, I think what we always say at the system, nothing is ever off the table. It's not something that we're talking about today, but we're going to have to continue to look at enrollment across our 26 institution and make certain there's critical mass, right? I mean, the hope is that we'll see a resurgence in enrollment at some of our institutions. But yeah, it's just something that we're just going to have to continue to monitor.
Thank you very much. You may not have it now, but can I ask for you to share with the committee at some point the investments? You showed us the kind of per student investment for HBCUs. You showed us the system-wide. Would you share with us, not for right this minute, the investments made of comparable, kind of predominantly white institutions of a comparable size
Within the
as well?
system?
Within the system?
Oh, sure, we can
yes.
show you how that
Yes.
looks, how
If
that
you'll
ranks
share that,
across
I'll
all,
get
yeah.
that out to the
And
committee
again,
as
I
well.
want you to think with the lens that no credit hours created
Yes,
equal, right? So
I
we're
understand.
never gonna see
Yes,
parity across every single institution. I absolutely
Understood.
share that.
and the formula you said was developed in 1984, and that was done through the legislative body.
So the legislative body, there was representation from the House, the Senate, the governor's
Great.
office, the community, higher ed. Yeah, it was, wasn't around back then, but there was a lot of folks involved in putting that formula together. Just a point of note, in 2011-ish, I think under Deal's administration, there was kind of a movement nationwide where people were starting to move away from an enrollment-based formula to performance. We did look at that. We made some recommendations, but that was tabled. And so we haven't revisited formula. But again, like I said, it is, some of the measures or factors are outdated. I mean, things have changed, but it's predictable. And I think when I compare us to some other states, I think there's value in having a funding formula.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I, as a member of the higher ed committee, could I ask our presenter to put together, hey, how are you? Great presentation, Nan Orrock, State Senate Higher Ed Committee. Two pieces. Number one, we are educating dreamers, K through 12, and then we charge them out-of-state tuition to come to our colleges. But yet we bemoan the fact that our student enrollment is dropping, but we're putting up a big stop sign for these students who cannot afford to pay out of state. And they can also, they're up at Dartmouth and the Northeastern schools who are giving them scholarships. So we are losing talented young people who are grade-wise eligible to be here, have lived here 90% of their lives, and are turned away from our higher ed doors because of charging them out of state tuition. So where are we on fixing that? Is one question. If we're talking about offering surrounding states students to come and do in-state tuition here, and we're going to deny it to these young people that have come through our entire K through 12, when are we going to fix that? And number two, and I know you don't have, you're not the queen of Georgia, so you can't say I'm going to fix it. Nor am I. Nor am I.
You think we have to live with it?
Hallelujah. He enjoys every day of it. No, but the other piece where Georgia is behind in higher education, and that is that we have no significant to date means-tested scholarship program, one of two states in the country, Georgia and New Hampshire, that don't have that. We just started that last mile funding in the last budget we passed, but those are two initiatives that would be wonderful to see the leadership at the university system attempt to move the needle.
If I could just comment, thank you for your comments. With respect to your first, the DACA students, we, by law, have to charge them. So that is above something I can do, that we can't assess them in-state tuition rates currently. If things change, we would obviously follow the will of the state. With respect to I call it gap funding, kind of that last mile funding. I will say there was a pilot program this year. The governor committed $5 million to kind of test out, because we talk about there's often students that, it could be $300, it could be $500, just a small amount of money to get them over the edge. And through the money that they received through the federal funding through the pandemic, the governor's, I call it GEAR, and I can't remember the acronym, but he committed $5 million. We spent every penny. of that money over about 6 semesters that went to our students. And so we're hopeful to kind of evaluate those results. We know there was some money put in the 23 budget to kind of look at gap funding. So we know it's a priority. It has the state's attention, and they're trying to move the needle on that. And then our chancellor is also, very committed just from our own board to looking at ways to find need-based funding for our students, because we recognize that the needs are growing based on our student population. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
President Dr. Helene Gale, Spelman College is next to the podium.
So.
Great, thanks so much, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. We probably haven't had as much engagement with the state senate as we would like to, so this is a great opportunity to open a dialogue and hopefully begin to have more of a relationship. I would just say, first of all, Spelman, and I'm going to just maybe emphasize a few things. We did not bring a lot of facts and figures. We would be happy to send you some of our data as well. I was enthralled with the last presentation. It's always great to get these different slices. But, let me say a little bit about the who, the what, and then, what are some of our core concerns. And as you know, we are part of the Atlanta Center consortium. We are, along with Morehouse College, the two that are four-year liberal arts colleges. Then you heard from President French, Clark Atlanta, and then Morehouse Medical School. So one of the things, I feel very proud of is that we are part of this consortium that, as you heard, has been around serving our community for over a century and a half. And, we all have our unique roles that we play. Spelman, as you know, has been around for over 140 years, and our focus is excellence in education of women of African descent, and really specific to how can we make sure that the voices of Black women are heard, the education of Black women is prioritized. We recently just finished our capital campaign. We had a capital campaign that was developed based on our strategic plan. We raised we had a goal of $250 million, but raised 80 million more than that. And so we are really proud that we have completed one of the largest capital campaigns in college history. And the campaign was really based on our 4 strategic pillars. 1, delivering on Spelman's promise, making the education of Spelman as available to young women as possible. Elevate Spelman's difference. What are those things that are specific and distinctive that Spelman has to offer? A big focus, and you heard it in President French's presentation as well, on enhancing our operational excellence and our infrastructure. We all know that too many of our schools have to have extreme deferred maintenance. And so we really put a focus on making sure that we could upgrade our systems, our physical environment, and then continuing to promote our academic innovation. And I'm very proud to say that as a result of a lot of those things that we have focused on, and we know that college ratings don't tell the whole story, but I think it really did speak to a lot of the ways in which we increased and continue to raise in the college rankings. Now, we're proud that for the last 16 years in a row, we've been rated as the top HBCU in the nation. We don't say that with just with beating on our chest and pride. We say that because it is wonderful to be able to demonstrate that HBCUs have excellence, and hopefully, with humility, we're showing that HBCUs can be real leaders in the educational field overall. So we're proud of that, but we're also proud of the fact that we were number 4 as top performers in social mobility. Clearly HBCUs are good value for money and have been what has really helped to create a Black middle class, create many of the professionals, whether it's doctors, lawyers, engineers, scientists, et cetera. And so the fact that, the ratings are now starting to look at our value from the standpoint of economic mobility, not just in terms of traditional academic excellence. We got number 7 in most innovative schools. And again, that was one of our strategic pillars to really think about how do we continue to innovate. Service learning, we moved up in the ranks, global opportunities for learning, et cetera. So we're really proud that having had this strategic plan, it has really helped to lead us in continuing to elevate our experience. We're also very excited about some of the areas beyond our wide range of majors and minors that we have some centers of real distinctiveness that I think are going to continue to help to propel some of our work and continue to attract students. So Africa, the African diaspora and the world, curatorial studies, social justice, women of color in STEM, comparative women's studies, et cetera. We also are about to hopefully launch a new program in cybersecurity and cyber policy. We're doing work in gaming, and some of these other things that are really showing, and you mentioned in your presentation how important these data science and data informatics and information are going to be important as future careers and where more and more of the future jobs are. We're also very proud that we recently launched with Morehouse College, a Center for Black Entrepreneurship. This is going to be a center that not only will be an academic center for our 2 schools and beyond, but also hopefully a resource for the nation. That when people think about Black entrepreneurship, and we know how important that is, women happen to be the fastest growing category of new entrepreneurs. We really hope that that's going to be a national resource beyond just the academic centers and a hub, not only for Atlanta, but hopefully the nation and maybe even the world. We're in the process of building a wonderful new building. Part of the campaign that we had, a very successful campaign, part of that was dedicated to this new building. It's named after my predecessor, the Mary Schmidt Campbell Center for Innovation in the Arts, and it's going to house our visual and performing arts, as well as our innovation, our work in innovation and the Black Entrepreneurship Center. Some of those courses will be held there. It's also importantly one of the first building, it is the first building that is partially outside of our gates. And we think that that's really important, that as being these kind of islands of excellence surrounded by neighborhoods of need, that we actually start opening ourselves up more and really working on how can we be good neighbors to our West End community that has housed us for so long. We also have a new online platform called eSpellman. And it's an opportunity to really address some of the needs of adult learners, people who are in the workforce, people who have already completed formal education or maybe did not get a full formal education, but need specific skills for the workforce. And we're proud of that, not only because it's providing a service to adult learners, but it's also going to be a revenue stream for us. So we've also looked at this whole issue of college affordability. We know that four-year college is getting more and more expensive. So we've looked at ways in which we can start offsetting some of those expenses by developing alternative forms of revenue, and eSpellman is one of those. So those are just, some of the exciting things that I think are going on now. Some of the issues are very much the same as others have mentioned. Housing, we have a shortage of housing. We have a finite land footprint, and we're looking at, with our colleagues with the AUCC, a long-term housing plan to really think about how can we, not only for Spelman's campus, but also collaboratively think about some of these housing needs for the long term. Infrastructure. We are all battling with some of those same challenges of how do we make sure that if we have students, that we also provide them the kind of physical infrastructure that supports their academic achievement. So we're really looking at some of those, continuing to develop our master plan around some of the infrastructure needs. And then technology upgrades, critical. We know from COVID how important it was that we were able to pivot to online, But I think the world is never going to go back to where it was before. And thinking about how we continue to use technology as an enabler for our education, but also for our processes so that we can be more as efficient as possible, and look at things like hybrid classrooms, et cetera. Faculty support is a huge one. You know, Senator Orrick mentioned students leaving because they can get offered better scholarship support elsewhere. Well, it's the same for our faculty. You know, now that people have discovered how important it is to have diverse faculty, we cannot compete. But our faculty aren't always asking for high salaries. They just would like the ability to develop their careers, do some research in other laboratories, get career and academic development support, et cetera. So some of these things that are so critical for just being able to keep our excellent faculty, 88% of our faculty have doctorate degrees. We want to keep those people. They are dedicated to what they do, but we need to figure out ways to do that. Scholarships and affordability, clearly, you know, while we have been fortunate to be able to garner financial support, we know that we are not able to do enough and not able to keep up with the need. We're actually in a different situation in terms of enrollment. We have almost tripled enrollment over the last 10 or so years, as people have had this renaissance in HBCUs and understanding their value, but it's hard to keep up with between the affordability and the need, making sure that we have the resources to make that financial need is not a barrier to being able to get a high quality education. So I will just stop there. Those are some of the things that are on our mind, and we'd be happy to send more data and information, but those are just some of our key points. Thanks.
Thank you very much. No questions. I just want to say congratulations again. You said at the top, you've been ranked #1 across the country for all HBUs for the last 16 years.
consecutive
So
years.
just to underscore on that, congratulations.
Yes. But as I said, you know, we hope that means we're lifting everyone up along the way, and we say it with great pride, but also with great humility.
Thank you very much.
I think it's that woman's factor too.
She does.
Thank you. So we are going to hear next from Mr. Harold Love. He's state representative for District 58 out of Tennessee's General Assembly. In an earlier meeting, we heard a little bit about what some other states around us have been doing recently from a legislative perspective. And Representative Love, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing and giving us some insight on Tennessee's work. Can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can. You've
All
got the floor.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and thank you to the members of this Senate Committee studying HBCUs. I'm Harold Love, State Representative for District 58, and I have 4 HBCUs in my district: Meharry Medical College, Fisk University, American Baptist College, and Tennessee State University, which is our land grant college in Tennessee. One of the challenges that we have had, similar to what you are having in Georgia, particularly how do our private HBCUs find a way to connect with state government, particularly when it comes to budget issues. One thing I found in conversation with my presidents of my private institutions was that they really did not feel comfortable asking for budget appropriations because they were not a state school. Several years back, our Governor Bill Haslam, initiated a Drive to 55 program, which was designed to increase the number of Tennesseans who had a college degree by 55% by 2025. And one component that was not included was the role that HBCUs could play in that Drive to 55 program. So I took it upon myself to have conversations with my other colleagues about how we might best improve our HBCUs and improve their access to state government dollars. As a result, House Bill 0553, which is our HBCU Success Program, was passed in 2017. This particular piece of legislation requires that every department in state government look into ways that they may collaborate with our HBCUs and find ways to increase graduation, retention, and enrollment rates of our HBCUs. As a result, we found that one of our HBCUs, Knoxville College, that had been closed for many years, was able to get reopened. And because of collaborative efforts between the University of Tennessee and Knoxville College, they were able to have professors from UT Knoxville come and teach class at Knoxville College. Another benefit was the fact that we found that our private HBCUs were able to receive funding through our Tennessee Higher Education Commission to have a bridge program in the summer prior to the freshman's academic year starting. So freshman students would come on campus, they would stay on campus, and they would get an orientation into what college life was like. We found this is very helpful for our private HBCUs. Then, of course, with our land grant institution, Tennessee State University, we had a committee formed in 2020 to research how much underfunding the university had been neglected. That was preempted by, of course, House Bill 823 in 2019, which required the Tennessee Higher Education Commission to report every year how much our two land grants were receiving from the federal government. Our committee that I chaired discovered that Tennessee State University had been underfunded for about $544 million, which we think led to significant infrastructure problems. Another report commissioned by our committee also discovered that Tennessee State had $337 million worth of infrastructure needs on the campus. But I am happy to report that as of this last legislative session, Governor Lee put in the budget $250 million infrastructure improvements. And since we have closed out of session, we've been able to get another $100 million. So to date, we stand at about $350 million that has been allocated to Tennessee State University to help alleviate the infrastructure problems on the campus. Our hope is that over a 5-year period, we'll be able to repair all the buildings that can be repaired. Those that can't be repaired will be demolished and new ones will be rebuilt. I want to emphasize again, this $350 million is not over a period of time, but it's going to take at least 5 years to construct all of these new buildings and repair all the buildings. But the money has been allotted at one time for Tennessee State University. I do also want to lift up one more project that we had completed and worked on in previous years, which is the HBCU Wellness Project. Meharry Medical College was the centerpiece of this HBCU Wellness Project, which was designed to create what we call student health ambassadors from our HBCUs that would be trained on reducing health disparities in all of our Tennessee counties. The students at these HBCUs would be brought to Meharry. They'd be trained on how to become student health ambassadors, how to do pre-test, how to do an intervention, and how to do a post-test. Those students would be enrolled at our HBCUs like Lane College, Lemoyne-Owen, Fisk University, Tennessee State University, and Knoxville College. And they would be engaged in reducing health disparities in their communities. This was designed to not only reduce health disparities, but also give African-American students at our HBCUs a chance to engage in the actual work of changing and transforming their communities. And so I want to salute you all because one of the architects of the HBCU Wellness Project is actually in Georgia now, Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice. And she was the architect behind getting that started. So I would encourage you to have a conversation with her about how you might be able to use her model that she started in Tennessee to also help in Georgia. And I'm open for questions now.
Thank you. No questions. Thank you very much, Representative Love. That's very helpful to understand what you all have done and kind of the process by which you went to arrive at where you are. I do have one question. Will you just share a little bit more about the first point that you did, kind of the success program, and having each of the departments at the state level have to report back on what efforts they've made to, I think you said either, graduation or, in order to help with graduation and retention rates, what each department within the state has done in terms of projects with HBCUs over the course of a year. So what does that look like? Give
Sure.
some examples of what that looks like for certain departments.
Right. So for example, the Department of Health. Prior to our HBCU success legislation, which also created an executive director position in the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, we found that Meharry Medical College was having difficulty in getting their contract signed for the HBCU Wellness Project. But once legislation was passed, it sped the project up, right? Because now the health department is engaged in increasing the retention rate of the students at Meharry Medical College. We also found that after this, the Department of Health began to reach out to the other HBCUs to offer them grant opportunities to enhance what health disparity reduction projects that we're working on. We also found that our institutions around banking and finance were able to have conversations with our HBCUs about increasing knowledge about 529 plans, saving for college. And so what it really did was it caused all of our departments to ask themselves, how can we contribute to the success of HBCUs? When the Opportunity Zone legislation came down from the federal government, because we had the HBCU Success Program in place, we found our Economic and Community Development, ECD department, then reaching out to schools like Lemoyne and Lane College and Tennessee State, who were placed in Opportunity Zones, and discussing with them how they might leverage the land where the university was to help increase business opportunities around the campus. And so those are just examples of how we caused every department to start thinking about how they could help our HBCUs. And what we found was this: it wasn't forcing them to do it, but just suggesting, even though the legislation did say shall, suggesting that they should be creative, right, in how they began to regard the talent at our HBCUs. When you begin to think about it, it also allowed the Department of Education to think about our teacher training colleges that are HBCUs and say, how can we increase the diversity, not just in the teacher pipeline, but also in our administrative pipeline at our schools all across the state. And so all we were asking to do was for every department to think about how they could do this. And I'll say at Tennessee State, we had a program that was designed to increase opportunities for students that had developmental difficulties. Prior to the legislation passing, there were only private institutions engaged in the program. But as of last year, Tennessee State received a grant to provide educational opportunities for students with developmental disabilities. And this was a direct result of our mental health and developmental disability department thinking about how could they increase opportunities to increase retention, enrollment, and graduation rates at our HBCUs. So those are just some of the examples that we have success in. And if you want to, I can send you all a link to the publication that our HBCU Success Program has now, which has each school to now create a strategic plan. And then the thing I think that really speaks loudest is the fact that you now have the presence of private HBCUs coming up to the Capitol, meeting with different agency heads on their HBCU day. We have a day on the Hill for HBCUs, and they're not afraid to engage in conversations about how the state can help them and about the possibility of having state allocations to help them.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate you joining. I think Representative Love is in Alabama, not Tennessee, at another meeting. And so thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to now move on, and we are going to next hear from Mr. Sterling Johnson. He's the Just Opportunity Portfolio Director at the Partnership for Southern Equity.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chairwoman, and the committee for having me, and to the esteemed colleagues I've had the pleasure of listening to today. I am fortunate that President Gale left out right after me. I was happy that I didn't have to go after her because it seemed like she had been glancing at my presentation a little bit. So I'll try to go a little bit fast. As mentioned, my name is Sterling Johnson. I'm the director of the Just Opportunity Portfolio with the Partnership for Southern Equity. And I'll talk briefly, I know I don't have much time today, about what that means, and so you all can understand the work that we do. I do want to give honor always to the legacy of the people who hold space here on the AUC and in these campuses. I unfortunately did not attend the AUC. It is so unfortunate, but I am a child of the AUC very much so. My mother is a Spelman graduate, as are my sisters. My father is a Morris Brown grad, and my aunts attended Clark Atlanta, and several cousins as well. So I've been here my entire life, trust me. And so I'm really thankful just to have the opportunity. I was really thankful just for some of the remarks that have been going on today. To hear the focus in different areas and different things I wanted to touch on, but particularly in my conversation today, I want to make sure we address this thought around community. What is community development and how is it related to this conversation on workforce excellence, one, but the role of HBCUs and having and facilitating that excellence as well. So I'll get into those remarks in a second. From the mission of the Partnership for Southern Equity, of course, our focus is on racial justice, right? We're anchored here out of Atlanta. Our work is looking at not only the city of Atlanta and Metro Atlanta, but of course the state of Georgia and the surrounding southern states. We take a regional approach to this conversation, and we're always focused on how do we advance racial equity and shared prosperity across the American South. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that in an intersectional way in a moment. But when we hear this conversation on racial equity, we know this has become a buzzword, right? It's something that we have heard a lot, that we've engaged with a lot, and some people have developed their own different definitions around. And so I always like to take the time to just start talking about what is it that we believe as we start having this conversation to ground this thought. And so for us, racial equity is the point at which the distribution of society's benefits or burdens are not skewed by race. We've seen, of course, if you look at data in different ways, that the individual lived experience of people of color, no matter how you want to look at the different intersectional forms of that, have all been skewed negatively around the color of your skin, right? We know that there's a lot of systemic issue and context historically as to why that has occurred. But we say, how do we make sure that when we're having this conversation that we're focused on, not just focusing on one singular issue, but how do we deal with the issue of race as it crosses over several different issues? So within PSC, we focus on that systems approach. We focus on transforming people along with that. So the values-based framework, leading with race and being comfortable having that conversation, catalyzing relationships always. And how do we grow the equity ecosystem and grounding our work in communities of color and communities of low wealth, right? Which is going to be important to this discussion as well. I mentioned, of course, the portfolio structure. My portfolio, Just Opportunity, is focused on economic inclusion, which is looking at the distribution of wealth, income, employment, other opportunities for people of color and people from low wealth communities. But of course, we also have our Just Growth portfolio, which is focused on equitable development and land use. Our health portfolio, which is focused on health equity, and our climate justice portfolio, focused on just energy as well. We also have an organizing component to our organization that do a lot of work in the youth development space, but I will not get too deep into that issue today. Our 4 principles of shared prosperity guide our work, the way we frame our conversations. First and foremost, which I think is going to be important to this conversation, is that development must happen with people and not to people. We've seen, of course, a lot of the shifting dynamics and demographics around Metro Atlanta really being centered on the fact that where our economic development practices, both traditionally and that have ongoing and continue to this day, have been done without the consideration of low wealth communities of color and have been grounded in it. Actually, a lot of that activity has been disruptive to low wealth communities of color. And so how do we make sure we're considerate of that? How do we look at the use of public and private investments to produce outcomes for people, planet, and profit? Right? And particularly, like I said, this conversation around communities of color and low wealth, looking at equitable growth as a superior growth model, and then how do we build individual and collective capacity to enable communities to lead their own change efforts, right? So not thinking about this from a charitable standpoint, right? Particularly in this conversation around our HBCUs, that they should be positioned to be leaders of efforts that revitalize the communities that they're sitting in and around. I mentioned a little bit just on our work and our mission, but really we kind of narrow this down to 3 primary points of focus, right? How do we support the equity ecosystem by using and championing new values that position communities of color and communities of low wealth to inform, participate, and benefit from the state, county, and municipal approach to economic development? the private sector's approach to economic growth, and our community's approach to economic sustainability, right? And we believe that, of course, our HBCUs are central to that. That they are, of course, knowing the history, and we don't have to get into that today. I think that's been well established, that they are an extension of the Black community and our civic leadership and influence by proxy, right? That they have and they sit in positions of influence within communities, and that we really are wanting to frame this conversation today about what is their evolution, what is the future innovation that can come from these spaces, and what does community redevelopment look like when our HBCUs are centered in leading that discussion? And ultimately, this question that was brought up briefly earlier about what does and what is the responsibility of the HBCU to the community outside of the walls. And so before we start talking today, and I'll jump around a little bit, I want to encourage all of us to think outside of the walls, right? That this is something that's a conversation that's much bigger than one singular institution. And so when we look at what the data shows us, is that something we probably all said and heard anecdotally, that it seems like all the HBCUs are situated in the hood, right? Why is that? And the data would factually support that, right? We see that 81% of all HBCUs located in the United States are in counties where the median wage is below the national average. That 65% of HBCUs are in geographic areas where past and projected job growth are slower than average. So we know that there is a dynamic here. And of course, if we had more time, we could get into redlining and the history of housing and racial segregation and how those things have been dynamically impacting the ability for HBCUs to not only grow, but the communities around them to grow, but we don't have time for that today. I know some of you are probably familiar with this data. This was taken from the researcher, Dr. Raj Chetty, where it shows, if you see these deep red colors down in the lower right-hand corner that shows the Southeast, that there's a significant challenge and issue around economic mobility, and that place is a significant predictor of that. That we know that in Georgia, we're among the worst states in economic mobility and income inequality. In Atlanta alone, 80% of Black children live in high poverty areas compared to 6% of white children, right? And so when we think about the impact of HBCUs, it's not just about how do we educate and prepare for the professionals, but how do we start having and seeing that influence turn into economic mobility? We also see that produces different types of infrastructure challenges. I could talk about a billion different ones, but for today, I want to focus in on the broadband connectivity and access issues. You know, of course, in this conversation on technology and innovation, that we had to be thoughtful about the fact that a lot of our HBCU communities, if you are paying close attention, you'll see that this area in this map closely mirrors the dark red in the previous map as well, that this is looking at the areas that are surrounding HBCU campuses and the broadband connectivity issues for Black communities that are resulting from that. And so we need to make sure that there's a thought around infrastructure and how we're addressing that challenge. Now, that's not to say everything is bad, and I definitely don't want to start off with a sour tone on my notes, because there, as you've heard today, is so much amazing work and things that are happening out of our HBCUs, right? We've seen the data that is, despite only being 3% of all institutions, that our HBCUs are producing 17% of all Black bachelor's degrees, 24% of all STEM-related bachelor's degrees earned by Black students, Black medical school applicants, Black engineers, Black lawyers, our judges, right? That there is significant and valuable work being done on these campuses, and that's all contributing to the work of economic mobility. However, that does not change the fact, and we have to be really thoughtful about this, that as all of this dynamic work is happening, that there's also significant data, and I did the research looking at the way in which the surrounding areas, the census tracts, where all of our Georgia's 10 HBCUs are located, are all very impoverished socioeconomic areas, right? And so we know, going back to this conversation about place as a predictor, that we have to be thoughtful about the way in which, even where the dynamic opportunity for economic mobility exists within our HBCUs, that has to extend outside of the walls of the campus as well, right? We've heard today about the issues around the enrollment statistics and things that are related to the fact that we need the opportunity to be extending this reach in different ways. Then what better way can we start extending that reach than to make sure that there's connectivity within the communities right outside of the walls? We know that education has a significant impact on economic mobility. According to the Association of Public Land-Grant Universities, that college graduates, of course, have over $1 million more in lifetime earnings. They're more likely to be civically engaged. They're more likely to be philanthropic, which of course, as a nonprofit, we appreciate. They're 3.5 times less likely to live in poverty and 5 times less likely to be justice involved. And to the question that I heard posed earlier about the return on investment, we know that obtaining a bachelor's degree means that on average that you will contribute over $300,000 more in taxes than you will be taking back in public services over the lifetime of your career, right? If you look at that against professional degrees and higher, that number jumps to well over $500,000 in taxes versus services received. And so we know that there's a not only return on investment, but that the work and role and influence of economic mobility matters. Right, so our HBCUs serve more Pell Grant eligible students. Apologies, I don't know what I just did. Serve more Pell Grant eligible students, first generation students, and that the mobility rates, and we heard President Gale touch on this earlier, are significantly higher. Mobility rate being measured by students from the bottom 40% that at the conclusion of their college career, their professional endeavors have moved into the top 60%. Right, of income earners, right? That's a significant statistic that definitely needs to be driven home, and that our HBCUs, because of the population they aim to serve, are central to a lot of that. I'm not sure what I did exactly. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so again, this is more than just about education, right? Education matters, it's a driver to economic mobility, but how do we make sure that even in this conversation, and I'm gonna jump through this really rapidly because I know I'm tight on time, how do we think about the way in which the role of these anchors, right? That there are institutions who are located in community from the economic development conversation. An anchor holds a lot of interest, right? So, social capital, purchasing power, real estate interest. We've heard all these things referenced today. They're major employers, right? And they have long-term interest in the success and financial and economic viability of the communities that they are surrounding as well. And so how do we think about this? This graph is used from the Initiative for Competitive Inner Cities, but it's something that's still very relevant to this. The conversation on anchors usually centers on the thought about eds and meds, right? Hospitals and universities. But generally what we're seeing in the economic development landscape is that communities being built around the infrastructure associated with universities are thriving right now, right? That there's a significant influence of being in these spaces, and it's because universities contribute in all of these different ways to the economies around them, right? As a purchaser, as an employer, right? Offering core products and services, building community infrastructure, right? But some of the challenges that are facing our HBCUs is that we're not, as we've heard today, being resourced in the same ways to be able to engage in that activity, right? If you see down here, Georgia's HBCUs, we know generate $1.3 billion in economic impact annually and create over 12,000 jobs. But how do we make sure that that impact is being felt and then subsequently returned to them in a way that's able to grow their influence as well? With all of this saying, there's still more work to do. Black degree holders are still twice as likely to be unemployed a year after graduation. Black employees still make up just 7.4% of the tech workforce. If you look at just HBCU grads, it drops to 6.2%. That Georgia's Black workers aged 25 and over are still twice more likely to be unemployed and more likely to be underemployed than their white, Latino, and Asian counterparts. And so there's more work that has to be done, not only on building the infrastructure for success, but also in how we consider and look at the ways in which we're connecting people to opportunity on the other side. We know and recognize that there's value in full employment. With the research that PSC and PolicyLink did in our Exploring the Future report, we know that the GDP of the state of Georgia would grow by $12 billion annually if we were able to solve for racial wealth gaps in employment. And that we know that nationally, when we look at closing the racial wealth gap through employment, of course, as being one means to that, that we can add $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion to the US economy, right? And so there's a long-term play here that we have to be thinking about as far as the national influence, but also an urgency about how we deal with this work on the local level. So I'll say this, that we've got 4 areas that we definitely need to consider, and I'll rush through the last couple of slides here. One, how are we thinking about where and how HBCUs are being positioned to lead future revitalization efforts, right? These thoughts around infrastructure investment, different types of development that's happening in the community, these private investments that are coming to not only our private, but also our public HBCUs. How are we thinking about the way in which that can be strategically levered to be able to grow the influence and impact of the communities surrounding them as well? How do we make sure that they're at the forefront of defining the future of work, right? We heard a little bit earlier about some of the innovative things happening here in the AUC about data analytics and the way in which that you are using data to drive the future or work or anticipate what the future needs will be. How do we make sure that our HBCUs are in position to lead that charge and be able to position our students, right, as they're going through that educational process for success? Are we having our HBCU service centers for innovative exploration, right? It's one thing that I've seen in the work. It's not enough to just say we need to do things differently, but we need to give people safe spaces to try things differently, right? And that there's a lot of value in that. We know that research and development is a huge component and function of a lot of the way our economy operates. And why can't our HBCUs be at the lead and forefront of that, similar to our larger research institutions that we might consider in a separate vein? And then how do we look at the incubation of Black entrepreneurs and support of diverse workers from underserved areas? I think that, we've seen a lot of that working with some things that were referenced today, the Propel Center, the Center for Black Entrepreneurship being key and central to that, right? Of course, we know the Morehouse Entrepreneurship Center and the Small Business Development Center are key, right? But then how do we start thinking about and making sure we're amplifying the reality that we're not just training young people of color to be workers in an economy that wants to take from their labor, but how can we start to position them to be owners, right? And leaders in that economy as well. And so how do we make sure we're leading that charge? This is just an asset-based approach. We can talk through that later. I'll send this over to you all. Thinking about the ways in which, of course, anchor revitalization has been stunted. We talked about some of these factors already, community underinvestment, which I think has been understated as an influence in this conversation as well. We want to think about how we channel resources to our HBCUs, but also what is the responsibility of our public sector to make sure that they're channeling investments to communities outside of the walls as well, right? That in order to build up this entire infrastructure, it's not just on the HBCU as an anchor to lead that charge, but they have to have partners in strategic places who are able to supplement that as well. Access to capital, liquidity, alumni giving, which of course has been suppressed by the racial wealth gap. When you got young people who are millennials or Gen Zers like myself who don't have significant wealth, and the thought of giving more is something that's challenging for them. And so making sure that that's something to be considered. Also thinking about endowment disparities, I think is a huge, huge issue. Something else that's worth considering and exploring in a little more detail, and how we can make sure that we're closing that gap. And I'll jump forward just really briefly. So on the future of work, our HBCU is preparing for the jobs tomorrow. We mentioned adult learners, right? Looking at reskilling, upskilling, and credentialing. How does the university support non-student job seekers, right? Are there ways, and we heard about some of the programming happening recently out of Spelman right now, and some others that are happening out of Morehouse, about how do we start closing the gap for people who may have started a degree, something that's important to consider as well. Partnering with Georgia's technical college system, I think is something that's huge. We've seen some of that down out of Fort Valley, some other considerations as to how we continue to create those access points and opportunities. And then lastly, I'll touch on this, Georgia's green economy. I think this is a great opportunity, a significant opportunity that we're seeing emerge, in particular in our solar industry in the state, that we haven't seen the movement for in positioning our young people of color and our workers of color to be able to maximize on. The latest solar job census has pegged Georgia as one of the top and leading states in the emerging opportunity. In the solar industry, we have some policy barriers there around solar caps that need to be considered as well. But even within that, right now, the industry is being dominated by middle-aged white men. And there are relatively low barriers to entry. There's some credentialing that will have to be done, but it's not something that would be prohibitive to young people of color to be involved in. So even in all these other industries that we're considering, how do we start thinking about this as being something that we should build within our HBCUs as well? And I'm pretty sure my colleagues will talk a little bit more about some of the resilience hub work that they've been doing also in that space. So I had a couple more slides. I know I'm over time at this point, but I just wanted to take a moment and just to step back and ask if there were any questions, any thoughts. And of course, the slides will be provided to you all as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
No questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. I am going to take Chairwoman's privilege and ask Rufus Montgomery from Cascon Group, who I see here, if he will provide some thoughts on the work that he's been doing with HBCUs over the years.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not sure if I need the microphone. Y'all can hear me okay in the back? Yes. Members of the Senate, HBCU presidents here, my president, Dr. French, Thank you for having me. Not here on behalf of a company or a group. I just had some thoughts, ideas that I've had conversations with most, if not all of you. As the pro tem, you've been very supportive of HBCU. You've always voted in the right way, Senator C, and your family, same thing with what you've done. What y'all might not know about Senator Andy Vitarde is he's looking at ways and has invited all HBCU presidents to come to the school districts in his areas. And they're not minority, majority districts. How do we change that? How do we talk about diversity? We'll have HBCU presidents coming into predominantly white areas. Polk County, for example, that type of thing. And the mighty Hornets over there, I was with their president yesterday up at the New York Stock Exchange. We were so proud. He was asking about you and talking about you as well.
Been there
But
twice.
it's been there twice. Hey,
I miss y'all group.
we will actually take it. There's, from what you've heard, from what folks have said, statistics, the facts in terms of where we are, these are things that have happened and where we are now. Where do you go forward? A couple of ideas. HBCU Capital Financing Program had $1.2 billion wiped out by the federal government. And on the infrastructure side, HBCUs, you take Florida, for example, they fund private HBCUs in Florida. And so we can think about things that Georgia can do with a $6 billion surplus. There are things on a one-time that I think, I know Clark Atlanta has some needs that they could be happy to hear about from the state. The White House HBCU initiative has not been done at the state level. We have 10 HBCUs here in Georgia. Why not a Georgia HBCU initiative? So when the study committee is done and it's over, you have something that continues. It's perpetual. It goes forward. And that can be whatever the presidents decide. Your board of advisors would be your presidents, and they can decide what the priorities are on an annual basis in terms of moving that along. And then finally, and again, this is my thought, to the south of Georgia is Florida, and you have Florida A&M, which is a state university. Go Rattlers. Okay. I have 2 degrees from Florida A&M. I have 2 degrees from Florida A&M. I also, my family members are Florida A&M graduates. I served as associate vice president at Fort Valley, the Fort Valley State University. I also served as the vice president for institutional advancement here at Albany State University. I had the honor of going to serve as the vice chair and then the chairman of my board of trustees in Florida. And by comparison to Georgia, we were getting about $178 million a year in the state appropriation. We had over $1 billion on our capital side. And I think about Albany State, I think about Savannah State, I think about Fort Valley State and the state of their current endowments. To the west of us is Alabama State University, $100 million endowment. To the north, but it's called Alabama. It has the state name. There's a reason to that. I'll get to that. Alabama A&M, state public institutions. To the north of us, Tennessee State University. Okay, to our northeast, South Carolina State University. Also north of us, North Carolina A&T and North Carolina Central University. Each of these institutions have at a minimum 6x more than each of the HBCUs here in Georgia, and there's a reason for that. And I having served as a board member, would say that one thing that none of the HBCUs in Georgia have, the state ones, is what they have outside of us. They have their own boards of trustees. I think the Board of Regents is bar none in terms of the national presence and what it does. But if each of these institutions had their own trustees who were very specifically focused on what was going on in their institutions, again, the Regents do what they do for the entire system. But what if each of these institutions had these outstanding folks who were raising money and who were very focused on what could actually happen? Why not have the 3 schools get together and then maybe have your own medical school, your own dental school, your own law school that's a public HBCU type deal? It's just a thought. So again, maybe controversial, but what are we specifically going to do to ensure that this is not an annual study committee, but where it's something that's actually permanent? So again, my thoughts. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll take any questions if there are.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, next, we will hear from Morehouse School of Medicine and Dr. Tyndall Adrian, who is the Dean and Executive Vice President of Health Affairs. Standing in for Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice, who is traveling on school business.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think I've got two disclaimers. The first one I think was already spoken to. I am not Dr. Montgomery Rice, President Montgomery Rice. She was dean and president, and actually was in the dean's seat for many years until last year. So I just wanted to make sure that distinction. I may be your twin brother. And the other one, which probably is a bit of a conflict of interest, is I spent 15 years in Florida. And so coming over here, I'm still adjusting to my football allegiance and a number of other things. But I will say that listening to this discussion, especially Mr. Johnson, I will tell you that I would probably tell the President Spellman that she missed a really good conversation with you. We're all dealing with some of the same issues, and I think it's really important. If any of you saw 60 Minutes the other day in Deion Sanders in Jackson State, you'll understand really what this is about. I also have a perspective in a different way because when I was in Florida, I also was in the dean's seat at the University of Florida as a predominantly white institution, and now I'm here as an HBCU, and I have gone back and asked the question. I think I'm the only dean of the Council of Deans who've actually had seats in both types of organizations, and it really provides an interesting perspective in terms of the needs. What I want to talk to you about today is the why, and you know, we've heard about Morehouse School of Medicine and what we stand for, and why is it why is the institution's mission so important? And we're all here for that mission. And the phrase that I think is really something you've heard probably over and over again is this issue of leading the creation and advancement of health equity, which has been, I think, burned into my mind since the time that I was actually being recruited here, because it really does mean something that's important to today's conversation. I actually had just come and pulled out a little bit early from a national conversation on the workforce diversity issues with Emory and a bunch of other folks, and a lot of this did come up. And what I wanted to indicate to you is the why. Why does the world need what we do best? Why is that so important? And there are a few data points that I think I want to share with you, which is interesting. Now, Morehouse School of Medicine it's a bit of a misnomer because it's not just about creating physicians. It's about the healthcare workforce. It's about public health. It is also about physician assistant program. We're actually organizing around a school of nursing. So it is really, and the research that has been established at Morehouse School of Medicine for decades with a lens in equity has been incredibly important to the entire purpose of where we are. But this is a use case, I think, which is interesting to look at, right? So of the percentage of all active physicians by race ethnicity, and you see where we are in the African-American category, just about 5%. And I will tell you that it is actually far worse when you think of academic medicine. It's about 2 or 3%. That is the inequity that we actually see. I pull this data because I think it's important to the conversation around healthcare and where we're going, and frankly speaking to the other institutions who make up this great campus, the AUCC. Where are the projected changes that we're seeing in the occupational groups? And when you look out to 2030, we can see that there's significant demand in the future in healthcare, but there's so many other occupations where the demand exists. And believe it or not, the disparities in terms of the workforce exist in each of these categories tremendously. And the other thing to think about is the fact that the workforce is aging too, right? And the workforce is actually growing older, which has considerable input when we think about the workforce needs of the future, especially in healthcare. And I want to bring this use case really regarding the physician component of this because it is an incredibly important story. There is a huge gap that will occur in the future when we look at the physician shortage projected out to 2034. And those numbers are real and I think are significant when we think about what that gap actually looks like. So this is a growing problem. And we're seeing this in all specialties. We're seeing this in primary care where we actually need it. We're seeing this in subspecialty care. We're seeing this in all other specialties what that gap looks like. This I want to pause on because it's incredibly important. Black male matriculants to schools of medicine between the 1980s and as late as probably 5 years ago. To think of the fact that Black male matriculants to schools of medicine in 1980 were more than Black male matriculants 5 years ago is an incredibly sad story. We've got to do something to shift that needle, and we're beginning to make some progress, but this is where we really need to see our institutions flourish. Because if we think about what might be happening in Supreme Court's discussions in the near future, it will actually eradicate a lot of the progress that's been made, and the burden is gonna be on our institutions to be able to focus on this. So this is really important. The NIH workforce, when we look at the diversity of individuals who are funded, federally funded by the NIH, the little sliver that you actually see there are African American, okay? The sliver, okay? We're a small percentage, and while that has grown to some degree over time, it still remains an abomination in terms of the number of physicians and scientists who are supported by federal funding. So what are we doing at Morehouse School of Medicine? I think this is the interesting piece to it. We've grown considerably as an institution across programs, not just the MD programs, but the PhD programs. We have residency programs that are really beginning to grow. We've got a storied pipeline program, okay? We're through K through 12, all the way through middle school, all the way through our MSMS programs, our pre-health programs, and our collaborations with our undergraduate campuses here, that we've actually developed one of the most robust pipelines in the entire country. The AAMC, the Associated American Medical Colleges, have looked at what we're doing as a model for other institutions because of the outcome of the output. But all of this has been pulled up, folks, with our bootstraps. Right? That this has not been because of infusion of some substantial amount of dollars, especially when we think about what other entities do over time. And so the pipeline program has been, and the pathway program has been incredibly important to the success we've had so far at Morehouse School of Medicine. Last year, we graduated our 1,000th resident, 1,000 residents, and a lot of these residents now practice within the state of Georgia, right? And there's an interesting look at this as we have thought about the blueprint for action, looking at where healthcare disparities truly exist across our state and how we can actually be a force of change for changing those disparities across the state. And you might know, obviously, lately, the maternal health has become a significant conversation around these disparities, and the work that we're doing at Morehouse School of Medicine with our Maternal Health Equity Institute, which has gotten some state funding to support what we're doing in trying to move that gap along. We've got close to 500 alums practicing across the state of Georgia, which is incredible. And this is the story that I think shows the impact of what has happened since Dr. Sullivan and President Gloucester really conceived of the Morehouse School of Medicine. So when we look back in 1970 and we look at the ratio of physicians to the population, we can see that in 1970 for every white physician, really served a population of 795 Caucasian folks. When you look at the same thing with regards to African American physicians, you can see the rather, I would say, catastrophic ratio. But here's what's happened over time. This is progress that's been made because of our HBCU campuses, and I would say also because of what has happened across the state of Georgia. We've been able to move the needle significantly, but there's still a lot of work that actually needs to be done. So we have a blueprint for action. All of what we do focuses around closing the equity gap in research, in healthcare delivery, in training the next generation of physicians who can serve a community, which is incredibly important. You've heard probably of this, which is the More in Common Alliance. This was a historic collaboration with Common Spirit, which was really conceived by President Montgomery Rice and then CEO of Common Spirit, Lloyd Dean, who just by happenstance actually met at a funeral of a colleague and decided they could put their heads together and think differently about how to impact this issue of equity and the healthcare workforce. And what has resulted from this historic collaboration is the conception that we can create medical campuses, not just in the state of Georgia, but across the country, that will actually be able to allow us to take this model and spread what we do across the country. But the impact of the state is incredible because it will result in the fueling of the growth of our class size and the support of the growth of our class size, and also being able to attract more students than Morehouse School of Medicine in actually providing them, I think, the dream of really becoming a physician and impacting their society. So together, I think there is so much to achieve. Over the years, I would say that Morehouse School of Medicine really represented a fairly small institution in terms of the total number of undergraduate students over time. But as you can see, we've grown over the last few years. And you all know Dr. Montgomery Rice very well. She has no breaks when it comes to this sort of stuff. There is a vision, and she is going after that vision, and we're keeping up because it is so incredibly important to this issue of creating and changing the landscape around health equity. I wanted to focus on the fact that we have a number of research institutes and centers. And I would say of all the institutions I've been to, only one of them, Morehouse School of Medicine, has an entire lens and focus on achieving this health equity issue and closing the gap. So whether it's our Neurological Institute or our Cardiovascular Research Institute, Maternal Health Equity, National Center for Primary Care, all of our institutes have a lens on delivering on equity. And this has been incredibly important. You know about the Satcher Health Leadership Institute, which is not just focused on issues around policy and clinical care delivery, but is focused on this really important issue of the political determinants of health. That the fact that public policy and politics actually does contribute to those disparities and what it is that we will actually do about it. The fact that the work that we're doing locally with our National COVID-19 Resiliency Network, which was a large grant from the actually the Health and Human Services at the federal government, to help to talk about the issue of COVID-19 and really disseminate across the network, across the country, educational material and really impact communities when it came to issues of COVID-19 related issues. So, and the other important thing is there was an inflection point that occurred, I would say just after the beginning of the pandemic, when it was recognized during the pandemic what inequities really meant and how it impacted people. And people all of a sudden turned their attention to the issues of health equity. Now it's a buzzword, right? What Morehouse School of Medicine was built on 20 years ago has now become currency today. Everyone is talking about it. And it actually has fueled a lot of our research in terms of private and as well as federal research funding, especially as it focuses on addressing issues of health equity. And I want to talk to you a little bit about infrastructure and I want to paint the picture of what I think are some of the headwinds that we actually face as institutions of color and HBCUs. So this is a view of the renovation of our laboratory spaces on the second floor of the Gloucester building at Morehouse School of Medicine. And why is this so important? Well, we've talked about and heard a lot about the endowments that support and fuel what we do, the needs for scholarship, the need for built infrastructure. One of the things that I will tell you is that there are a lot of formulas out there, and there's also a federal formula for funding. Being in the great state of Florida and coming down to the great state of Georgia, I will tell you that in Florida, I heard this recently, that there's a considerable amount of state funding to help build infrastructure. In places, and most of our HBCUs, a lot of the infrastructure was built using federal dollars. Well, it turns out that when you actually get a grant from the NIH, the grant gives you direct dollars, but also you get indirect dollars to help build infrastructure. Those indirect dollars oftentimes are predicated on how large your infrastructure is. So places like Harvard, $52 billion of endowment, they have a large infrastructure. Because they have a large research infrastructure, they get more dollars of indirect per dollar of direct funding. Places like Morehouse School of Medicine, because a lot of our built infrastructure was with federal dollars, it's discounted. So our actual indirect is about 50% of what Harvard would get for the same grant. So any faculty member who actually applies for a grant, competing for the very same grant, less dollars comes into our institution compared to a place like Harvard that's got all the endowments to fuel it. That is an inequity that we have to close, right? Places like Florida, where the state funding helps to support and build that infrastructure, will not see that discount because of the actual formula. So these are the things we have to understand. The more we build with federal dollars, the less likely we will see our actual indirect F&A action rates go up. So this is important to understand as we build this community and we support our students to be in contemporary spaces in order to compete with other institutions, because you hear a lot about the fact that the best and the brightest are leaving our state to go elsewhere. We want to make sure that we're able to compete, and we ought to be able to give our students the very best of what they deserve, on parallel with any other institution that delivers the same kind of education. So it's critical for us to think about the funding mechanisms that come into institutions like Clark Atlanta and Morehouse College and Spelman that all rely on the very same formulas, and to understand that the balance of federal versus state funding actually has a long-term impact when it actually comes to those IDC rates. Some of the building projects we're actually doing, the wonderful Dean, Calvin Smyrie, who has left us, unfortunately, and is moving on to ambassadorship. We're extending our education center in his name, and it's going to be a wonderful project. Groundbreaking has occurred already on this. And I don't know if this will actually play or not. And if it does, let's see if it will work. The reason I wanted to do this is because the why. Why are we here? And we're here because of our students. This is one of the reasons that I actually was attracted to here. It's actually embedded in there, so I want to make sure it's perfect. And bringing the voices of the students to you, I think, is important to sort of understand the why. And I say that because when you see this, now this is a TikTok video. I do have TikTok on my phone because my girls made me get TikTok on the phone. As a matter of fact, they are the ones who told me about this. And this was after our convocation and white coat ceremony. And I just got a kick out of this because it will tell you the why. This is what we need. And so I would want to leave you with hopefully some of this.
It's White Coat, and we're asking everyone what type of doctor do they want to be. Okay, y'all. Hey. Hi. What type of doctor do you want to be? I want to be a dermatologist. Oh, very good. Surgeon. Oh, okay. Period, though. I'm going to be the best neurosurgeon. I know that's right. That's right, Timmy. Okay, Paige, what type of doctor do you want to be? I want to be an orthopedic surgeon. Okay, ortho. Okay, Dr. Emmanuel, what type of doctor do you want to be? Orthopedic surgeon. Okay, ortho. All right, Nina, what type of doctor do you want to be? Either anesthesia or diagnostic radiology. Okay, period. Okay, Lacey, what type of doctor do you want to be? I want to either be a dermatologist or interventional radiologist. Oh, makes sense. Look at that skin, y'all. Okay, Selena, what type of doctor do you want to be? I want to be a surgeon, but I'm also interested in pediatrics. Oh, okay, for the kids. Okay, Jared, what type of doctor do you want to be? I plan on becoming a neurosurgeon, not that neurologist. Oh, okay, cool. What type of doctor do you want to be? I want to be a good doctor that serves her community well. Oh, yeah, period. Okay.
I'm going to leave it right there because I think that was the drop the mic moment. Why is this important? Well, for a few reasons. One is we have the next generation in front of us. These are whom we are supporting. These are the lives. This is why I'm here. I'm here to get behind them, to be the wind in their sails, to ensure they're able to do this and then serve their community. That's one issue. The second thing, which is really important, is we need to be able to attract the faculty. to support this process. And that faculty also is based upon built infrastructure. What you heard here too, which is really important to understand, is that the whole world now are looking for the very same talent that are likely to be here at our AUCC campuses. The whole world, we're competing for those very people. We're competing successfully, I think. But when we think about the opportunity to invest in our missions here at the AUCC campus, all across the undergraduate campuses in Morehouse School of Medicine, what we are able to do is to fulfill the dreams of these individuals who will then be able to serve society in amazing ways. This is our mission. This is what we're here to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian, for your presentation. I am a Florida native and I've been here 28 years, so you don't have to apologize for being a Gator fan. I have not switched over yet.
You have not?
Especially not now. My first cousin is a offensive lineman coach. He played and now he's back being a coach. But you had a slide earlier, if you could just go back to, it's like, I think it was the second or third slide.
I'll certainly go back. Let me just go to slideshow and then I'll get back in.
Or you scroll up if you, Keena?
All
Okay.
right, second or third slide.
Well.
Data slide? Was that a data slide or?
It was very colorful. And I should have stopped you when you were
Narrows it
there.
down.
I should have stopped you when you were there. It's gotta,
What was the question? Maybe I could circle back to the slide.
okay, I'll come back. I'll just, it's there. There it is.
Ah,
There it
okay.
is. Ooh, thank you. That's it. That's all. I just needed to see that real quick.
No, it's our blueprint. This is where we need to make impact. And we're constantly, I mean, this is partly also part of the data science piece of it, right? We're constantly looking at where those needs are and ensuring that we're able to support and put resources to those needs and people, because that's important too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else have questions? I have one comment / question maybe. So Morehouse School of Medicine is, how many total medical schools do we have in the state of Georgia? Do you know?
So we've got Morehouse School of Medicine, we've got Emory.
Yeah.
Mercer.
And Augusta.
And Augusta, yes.
So you're one of the four.
PCOM.
Oh, Pecan, that's right. Thank you very much, Pecan.
Okay, good.
What's Pecan?
Philadelphia
It's
College.
Oh,
St. Patrick,
Philadelphia,
it's the
okay,
St.
yeah,
Patrick program.
yep, got it.
Madam Chair,
Got it,
if we
yeah.
can get these,
All the
slides,
presentations,
it'd be
absolutely.
great.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Including the TikTok.
Yep. Fantastic. Thank you very
Okay,
much for your
Thank you,
presentation.
thank you.
And our final speaker of the day, presenter, is Mr. Nathaniel Smith, who is the CEO and the founder of the Partnership for Southern Equity. So he will close out testimony for the study committee.
So first of all, I want to say good afternoon to everyone who hung in there and stayed till the end, as well as the study committee, Senator Halpern and others who are viewing this online as well. This is a very important topic. It is a topic that will influence our future, in particular from an economic development perspective. Will we choose to create a competitive economy with all people engaged, or will fight this fight with other states and other continents with one arm tied behind our backs? You know, that is a question that we have to ask ourselves. And hopefully my comments, which, you know, Senator Halpern, it's hard for me to read my comments, but I'm gonna do what I can today to read and not get too excited about this moment. But I thought it would be important to really formalize this conversation and submit these for the record. So thank you again for offering me and my staff, Sterling Johnson, who I believe did an exceptional job laying out the data and the case for why we needed to move forward. For an opportunity to share some thoughts about an issue important to our organization overall, but of equal importance to me personally. I also want to thank Clark Atlanta University and President French for hosting this hearing on its beautiful campus.
Yes.
My name, of course, and it's been said before, is Nathaniel Smith, and I have the honor of serving as the founder and chief equity officer of the Partnership of Southern Equity, a regional multi-issue nonprofit organization headquartered in Atlanta, whose mission is to advance racial equity and shared prosperity for all, not only in metropolitan Atlanta, not only in Georgia, but the American South. At PSC, we work every day to disrupt the systemic harm Black people and other historically disinvested communities of color endure due to unjust policies, practices, and economies designed to dictate who wins and who loses. We believe America needs a values revolution, where justice, freedom, democracy, and equity are cornerstones for all people to realize their dreams in this state and nation. As a fourth generation Atlantan and son of Southern Freedom Movement activists who served at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference under Dr. King, I have come to this conversation as a proud Georgian, bearing a legacy of social justice. And I'm also a proud graduate of a HBCU.
Yes.
As my father before me, I'm a graduate of Morehouse College. This institution was instrumental in shaping my identity, my politics, my consciousness, and filled me with great purpose. I am indebted to Morehouse for its academic rigor, cultural awakening, bonds of brotherhood, and instilling in me the power of audacity. But my experience is not unique. During these hearings, I am sure many shared how transformative HBCUs have been in offering students the minimal resources, a quality education and positioning with minimal resources, a quality education and positioning graduates to positively contribute to society. That is the HBCU narrative. We marvel at its success, its resiliency, its perseverance. But our focus should not be on HBCUs surviving. It should be on HBCUs thriving. Today, let us conclude these hearings by allowing ourselves a space to imagine their potential economic impact if provided the necessary policy and fiscal investments for long-term resilience. During the first committee hearing, Mr. Rodriguez Murray of the United Negro College Fund offered data on the economic impact of HBCUs nationally and in Georgia. According to this analysis, the total economic impact of Georgia's 9 HBCUs to the state is $1.3 billion. An amazing statistic to say the least, but way short of this potential impact. I am offering a different frame to the discussion, Madam Chair. Many times we talk of impact with regards to people, namely how HBCUs contribute to the social mobility of its graduates. And that is good. I am a beneficiary of its success, but we need to expand our gaze and broaden our imagination. We need to ask ourselves, how can HBCUs be a catalyst for shared prosperity and competitiveness in the communities and states they support and serve? Let me offer some context, and Sterling has provided some great statistics, but there are two in particular, and I believe in constantly providing these statistics so it can sink in. And this is from McKinsey and Company, where it says that 81% of HBCUs are in counties where the median wage is below the national average. Black Americans in the workforce earn a median annual wage approximately 30% or $10,000 lower than white workers. And there's an estimated $1.6 trillion gap in aggregate revenue between Black-owned and non-Black-owned businesses across the country. HBCUs can play a critical role in closing those gaps if we provided the proper resources and investment for those communities. With proper investments and partnerships, HBCUs can serve as anchors to economic development while also developing pathways for entrepreneurship and equitable worker compensation. If this data is not compelling and you need more of a qualitative perspective as it relates to whether I'm telling you the truth or not, then all we have to do is step outside this campus and walk towards Joseph Lowry Boulevard or towards Martin Luther King Boulevard and back down Northside Drive to Fair Street to see the challenges that we're facing economically as it relates to really revitalizing our communities that are surrounding our HBCUs. This exercise can be done around any of the other HBCUs across the state. We have an opportunity to transform these HBCU communities by realizing innovative strategies like an HBCU Economic Prosperity Planning District, similar to other planning districts yet centered around HBCUs. In these prosperity districts, city, county, state, and federal government can strategically leverage their resources to grow the requisite physical and civic infrastructure of these communities in order to modernize our campuses and surrounding communities. Within the districts, investment can be made in the following ways: housing, develop attainable mixed income housing on HBCU-owned property. This would diversify institutional revenue, provide off-campus housing for students and workers, and also provide affordable housing for families and create retail space for local businesses. We also can focus with these investments on digital infrastructure. Districts can receive upgrades in broadband fiber optics to strengthen Wi-Fi capability, as well as increasing access to internet services. And of course, small business development. We can invest in small business development in commercial corridors where HBCUs serve as local incubators to provide entrepreneurs with the technical assistance, knowledge, and resources to start local businesses. We also, as Mr. Johnson talked about, this gives us an opportunity to bring our HBCUs forward towards the clean energy revolution through environmental upgrades. You know, we can improve the local environment by adding additional tree canopy, preserving green space, protecting waterways, building dedicated bike lanes, constructing walkable paths, and encouraging urban farming. We can also use this opportunity for a clean energy transition to begin the process of providing campus property upgrades for many of the schools who are in need of repair by utilizing energy efficiency and retrofitting opportunities to ensure that these schools will be around for another 100 years, regardless of what is happening around them. So it's about supporting public-private partnerships to improve campus facilities where buildings are weatherized, resilient, and use various forms of energy for power. As well, investments can be made to construct resilience hubs. We're actually in the process of developing a resilience hub in Atlanta University Center now, as we are trying to do at the Atlanta University Center so the community can have access to vital resources, especially during natural disasters. And of course, workforce development centers. In each district, HBCUs can partner with existing or create new workforce development centers to provide local resident certification training to enter emerging economies where Black workers are underrepresented. These are but a few of the possibilities an HBCU Economic Prosperity Planning District can offer. This is an audacious idea, I know. But it's time for us to entertain innovative approaches to support our most historic and valuable institutions and the talent they cultivate. We can no longer accept what is, but need to seriously consider what can be. Again, I want to thank the Senate Study Committee for allowing me a chance to share some thoughts about HBCUs and ways Georgia can maximize their potential to serve as catalysts for economic and community development. Georgia's success is tied to HBCUs. Now let us put that reality into action. Thank you very much. And I'll take any questions if you may, if you have any.
I don't think that we have any questions. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming and presenting to us and closing out our study committee. This is the final meeting of our full committee. This was our third meeting. Just in terms of what happens from here, we will absorb what we've heard over the course of all of these speakers in 3 meetings and write a final report with some recommendations. The next step for the committee will be another meeting of the committee to kind of adopt the final report and recommendations as a committee. And this particular study committee will dissolve on December 31st, 2022. So that work will happen between now and before we get to the end of the year. And I want to just say thank you to each of you for coming today, participating. I'm going to give another reminder about public testimony. And if you are interested in this, make sure that you let everybody in your own networks know as well that the public also has an opportunity to submit testimony through that website, hbcustudycommittee.com, so that we can see what others think about what we need to be doing and how we need to be thinking, and that can help inform our report as well. Is there any other comments for the order of the good? Well, with that then, our study committee meeting today is officially concluded. Thank you very much. Oh, yes, you can, of course.
And you're welcome to.
I've done one.